How your customers find, consume, and share your content on mobile is more important than ever. Our first speaker is here to show us how to tackle tough challenges through content strategy, auditing, and the core model. Please welcome President of AHA Media Group and author of The Digital Crown, Winning at Content on the Web, Ahava Leibtag.
Thank you. Good morning. So, just waiting for the slides to come up. Great. So last week, a design firm that I work with sent me the wireframes for our mutual client. It's a healthcare system, and they wanted me to look at them to make sure that they fell in line with the content strategy that we had agreed upon with the client. Now, what's interesting is that this agency is taking a mobile-first approach, which is exactly the way that you should do it. But when I looked at the wireframe, I noticed right away that something fell out of what I thought was appropriate for the client, and that is this button right here. So the first time that somebody comes to one of our digital properties, that's our opportunity to make a first impression on them. And chances are that when somebody's coming to a hospital's website on mobile, they're probably not looking to pay their bill at that moment. So the first impression that's sent to them is, make an appointment with us, pay your bill, and go into this weird black locked box that you don't even know what's really there. So what I said was that we should move the patient care button up to pay my bill and switch pay my bill down lower on the mobile site so that people would not feel like the first thing that they encountered when they started having a conversation was a grab for their money. And that is our jobs. If we're here at this conference, then we are responsible to make sure that the communications between our company or our organization and our audience are smooth. And content strategy helps to do that by this core model idea. And this idea is that we want to make sure that we are solving for our business objectives, but we also want to make sure that we're helping customers do what they need to do and want to do. We are going to explore content strategy through the book and the movie, The Martian. How many people here have seen the movie? Okay, awesome, good. So The Martian was a best-selling book, and they turned it into a very popular film. It's about an astronaut named Mark Watney who gets stranded on Mars. There's a huge storm, and NASA orders the astronauts who are there studying the planet to leave immediately. During the storm, Mark's communication panel gets knocked out. They leave the planet thinking that he's dead. He wakes up and realizes he's on a barren planet with no way of getting back to Earth. Now, he's a botanist, and he's a scientist, and he has a strong will to survive, and so he has to re-engineer all of the things that NASA created in order to make sure that he could survive. Now, NASA sent the astronauts to live there for like 50 days, and he ends up living there for 2.5 years. So he has to redesign all of the elements that were there for him for 50 days to last over 2.5 years. So this is Mike Montero. He's a well-known designer, and he defines design as solving a problem within a certain set of limitations. So I love this definition of it because what it really means is that all of us are designers because we all solve problems within a certain set of limitations every day. I actually took 2 planes from Washington, D.C., where I live, to here in Sioux Falls. There wasn't a direct flight, so I had to design a flight that took me to Chicago and then took me to Sioux Falls. I can't fly. I don't have that capability. That's a limitation. So thankfully, the Wright brothers designed a way for me to be able to get here. So in our organizations, we have limitations, and we learn to get around them. We have infrastructure limitations. We have technology limitations. We have budget limitations. That's a limitation. Design is solving a problem. If one of your executives says, we've only got this much money to solve this problem, you have to find a way to solve the problem within those parameters. Business vocabulary is a huge problem. We often find that when we start a project with clients, we ask them, what are the words that you use around this? And then we tell them from search and data and persona research these are the words that your audience is using around these terms. We need to find a way to agree on them so we can move forward with solving this problem within these set of limitations. Further limitations, operational problems, budget again, politics, right? Politics is a huge limitation in many, many organizations. Who owns this? Amanda's later going to talk about silos and how to cross those bridges. So again, if two people are fighting about who owns a certain part of the website or the social media channels, you have to design a solution within that set of problems around people. And now we're going to come to the problem that we want to discuss today, which is screen size. So mobile completely changed the landscape for designers, for people in the web, for executives thinking through what this was going to mean. And so I want to show you a clip from The Martian that I think perfectly illustrates the way that we all felt when we realized mobile was a real thing. So let me just set up this clip for you. So this is the spaceship on Mars, and Watney has to take this spaceship up to the Hermes, which is this huge spacecraft that's designed to travel between Earth and Mars, in order to meet the astronauts and be taken home to Earth. The spacecraft was originally designed for 6 of the astronauts, and it's extremely heavy. In order for him to get up to the Hermes, the spacecraft that's orbiting around Mars, he has to be going very fast. So what we're going to watch now is a clip that shows a teleconference between the engineers at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the executives at NASA about how they are going to re-engineer this ship in order to get him up to the spaceship and back to Earth. So here we go.
Okay, we're going to start by stating for the record that you're not going to like this.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the problem is the intercept velocity. The Hermes, well, it can't enter Mars's orbit. Otherwise, they'll never have enough fuel to make it home. The MAV, that was only designed to get to low Mars orbit. So in order for Mark to escape Mars's gravity entirely and to intercept the Hermes,
He has to be going fast.
Exactly.
Which means we need to make the MAV lighter. A lot lighter. 5,000 kilograms lighter.
Well, you can do that, right?
Well, there's some gimmies right off the bat. The design presumes 500 kilograms of Martian soil and samples. Obviously, we won't do that.
And there's just one passenger instead of 6. With suits and gear, that's another 500. Ditch the life support, don't need it. And we'll get Mark to wear his EVA suit for the whole
Wait a
trip.
second. If he's in his EVA suit, how's he going to operate the controls?
Well, he won't. Martinez will pilot the MAV, well, remotely from the
We've never
Hermes.
had a manned ship controlled remotely before. But I am excited about the opportunities that affords.
If we go remote, we can lose the control panels, the secondary, tertiary comm systems.
Wait a second. You want a remote control descent with no backup comms?
He's not even got to the bad stuff yet. I mean,
Well, let's skip to the bad stuff.
We need to remove the nose airlock, the windows, and hull panel 19.
You want to take the front of the ship off?
Sure. The nose airlock alone is 400 kilograms.
You want to send a man into space without the front of his ship?
Well, no. We're going to have him cover it with pad canvas. Look, the hull's mostly there to keep the air in. Mars's atmosphere is so thin, you don't need a lot of streamlining. By the time the ship's going fast enough for air resistance to matter, it'll be high enough that there's practically no air.
You want to send him into space under a tarp?
Yes. Can I go on?
No.
Okay, so let's dissect that scene for a second. How many of you remember explaining to your bosses how you were going to have to redesign a mobile screen in order to make it useful for the people who were looking at it? I love the part where he says, we've never done that before, but I'm excited about the opportunities that provides, like straight out of Management Training 101, right? Your people tell you there's a problem, and you're going to decide that you're going to try to be nice about how to solve it. And then he's in disbelief. Like, he cannot believe that they're actually thinking of this crazy idea to send this astronaut up into space with a tarp. And it's the same way that people reacted when we told them, you're gonna lose all this real estate, and we're gonna have to figure out how to communicate with people on these tiny devices. And so Responsive came along and was incredibly helpful in terms of realigning the grids, sending out the media queries to the devices to find out what the devices were, and then to send back the appropriate layout. But it didn't solve all of our problems, because what happened, which often happens to content, to quote Don Draper, the most important, least important thing there is that if we don't think through how people are going to encounter the content when they first start consuming it, we're not, no matter how great our responsive design is, we're not solving the problems of our audience, which is really ultimately our goal. So designing for mobile is really about content strategy first, and then mobile design second. And this is difficult in a lot of organizations. I know that. Design gets the important focus. People really care about design. But if you think about it, people don't go to your digital properties to look at the design. They want to consume the content. They need questions answered. They want to learn more about what it is that you offer. You're trying to build trust with them, and the content is an incredibly important part of that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is understanding customers' needs and how we go about doing that. Then we're going to talk about a little bit of the technology, what looking through your content ecosystem looks like, and auditing to make sure that there are things that you really want to put on your mobile site, how to create a content model and prioritize your content, and then how to move forward with design and testing. So let's first talk about understanding users' needs. So when NASA was thinking about 6 human beings living on the planet Mars, they designed the habitats that they lived in and the environment for 6 humans. And they know everything that they can know about humans, right? They know that they need food, and they need water, and they need oxygen. So too, in the same way, when you are thinking about your audiences, you need to know everything you can about them. Now, this is a persona, and this is a lovely looking document, but this document is based upon dozens of hours of research for a company about who their audiences are. Now, on this persona, all of the demographic information about Adam is on the left side of the page, and the backstory is on the right. Now, what content creators need in personas is 2 things. They need to understand why they're first interacting with your content, and the second thing that they need to do is they need to build empathy. So we look up at Adam. He's seeking IT services. We need professional help with our IT. Now, Adam is 38 years old. He lives in Bethesda, Maryland. It's a suburb of Washington, D.C. He went to Georgetown Law School, Penn for undergraduate. He's a patent attorney. His family makes about $300,000 a year. He has an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. He coaches his son's soccer team. They go to California twice a year. He shops at Brooke Brothers and J. Crew. How many people know a guy like Adam, right? So, and guys like this, it's hard maybe for us to necessarily create some empathy, but when we read his backstory, what we see is that he wants to do a great job for his company, and he wants to satisfy his customers' needs, and he's looking for services that are going to help him do that. And so when a content creator is brought into the heart and mind of an audience member, they are better able to craft content for them. The other important thing about thinking through these personas is the user journey. So this is an extremely simple user journey. Designers have much more intricate user journeys typically, particularly on transactional websites. But for a content creator, this is a very important document. At the end, we start with what we want him to do. We want him to call the IT firm with questions, and we want to schedule a meeting. Then we start with his motivations, and we fill in what are the questions that he needs answered when he encounters the content. And we can see here that this is sometimes a really great way to do a quick and dirty gap analysis, because if you see the questions that he's asking and then you look for where the content is, you may be able to see that you don't really have it answered, or that it's not living in the right place so that it's easily accessible to him. And then we want to go ahead and we want to map where are the touch points that he's going to encounter this. Keeping in mind that not all of it will be digital. Some of it may be in person, some of it will require, a handshake at the end. And so getting to know what our users really need and want is an incredibly important part of starting to think about content in general, but then moving on to designing for mobile. The other important thing to think about is when and where are they going to want to interface with you? Because if we don't understand when they're going to be coming to your property, wherever they are, whatever is going on in their lives, whatever they're doing at that moment, we can't design effectively for them. So I took 2 planes here, both of them were United. And this is my I made these tickets way before. And anyway, so if you look at the check-in for United, look at all those buttons. So what is United telling me? We just want more of your money. We're not really interested in making this a streamlined process for you. So what they've done is they've meta messaged to me that, in fact, they don't really care about my experience, they care about their business objectives way more. And at the bottom of the screen, you see view boarding pass options, and that's where you can click to actually check in. This is Southwest. So Southwest, this is their app, and you go there. They care so much about your experience that they even let you bypass their gate. It would be much more valuable for them to have you log in, because then they could track your efforts. But they know that the people who deal with Southwest are looking for a fantastic customer experience, and they build that in to their technology. So here you see the next screen. You can check in. All you need is your confirmation number, your first and last name, which hopefully you know, and then you retrieve the reservation, and you can add it to your Apple Wallet, or I assume on Droid there's a similar function. This is a successful company, right? So what happened with United is an indication of what's happening internally with their culture. Their culture is not focused on their passenger experience. Their culture is focused on the bottom line. Southwest is focused on the customer experience, and that improves their bottom line every time. So when you're thinking about how to solve a problem within a certain set of limitations, one of those limitations may be that your business objectives are in conflict with your audience. And that's an important thing to talk about with your teams, because you're going to have to find a way to satisfy the customer, because when you satisfy the customer, you usually can get a lot closer to satisfying the business objective. Another way to learn about your customers and build this into your design protocol is to look at the devices they're actually coming to your website with. That can certainly help you design and cut down on how many different grids you have to think through. So we understand who we're talking to and why we're talking to them and when we're talking to them. So now we want to understand about the technology. So again, if you're on the developer side or you're on the IT side, this is something you really have to know in depth. But I also think that you really also have to know in depth how to do the things that you're going to do so that you can have an intelligent conversation with the people that you're working with on the development side. So when I was 22 years old, I was interviewing in New York at an advertising agency, and I really wanted to be in creative. I'm a writer. But it was very hard to get a copywriting position. And there was a production assistant position open. And I interviewed with this guy, Bob Nelson, and he said to me, "Why do you want to be a production assistant? Like, I read your resume, you have journalism, you have writing, you should be a copywriter." And I said to him, "Well, I think it's really important." I made this up on the spot. I said, "I think it's really important to understand the technology and how you're actually developing the commercials and filming them and editing them. That makes you a better creative in the end." So I got the job. So the point is that we need to share the vocabulary of all the people that we're working with. And that means getting in a room at the beginning and going through the glossary of terms, just like you do with your client, in terms of the audience terms versus your own. So really thinking through the vocabulary of how the technical people think through this and how the creative people think through this, and marrying them so that everybody's speaking the same language at the beginning of the project will impact the design. So there are basically right now 2 ways to go about this. There's a native app and there's a responsive app. There are still sites that are on mobile, but we're moving ahead in the future. It's 2017. So the pros to a native app are that it's always on the phone. You can keep track of people or the tablet, and generally everything works faster. The cons are that they have to download it. They have to remember their password. You have to maintain multiple code bases. Responsive gives you that one code base and scales to any device, but it can be complex to code, it can be expensive, and performance can be an issue. So this is the National Gaucher Foundation. This is 3 panels of their mobile experience. They are a foundation that's dedicated to a rare hereditary disease. It didn't make sense for them to make an app. What they were really looking to do is provide information. They understood their audiences very clearly. They wanted to attract people who should be tested for Gaucher, people who have Gaucher, and researchers and scientists who might be interested in the work that they're sponsoring and doing there. So a mobile site made the most sense for them. This is SoulCycle. SoulCycle is a transactional relationship. They know, and they also have a responsive website that gives you, that's information rich. But they know that what people really want to do when they talk to SoulCycle is buy passes, schedule classes, find out who the teacher is going to be, find out how long the class is going to be. So they create a very smooth app experience in order to be able to provide people with that information. This is the energy company near where I live. This is the app that they use. So you can see they're balancing their business objectives with the objectives of their audience. I can pay my bill there, which is something that I might choose to do if I set it up to be monthly recurring on my app. Certainly from a tablet, it might be something that I choose to do. I can also view my bill. I can also report an outage. And notice how that's the first thing on their app, because they understand that people want to hear, we care about you first before we get to what we need from you. So responsive design won't fix your content problem, but content strategy will. So responsive design is wonderful. It's fantastic. It's really helped us. We've made, great leaps forward with it. But if we don't think about the way the content is going to display to our users and our customers, then we're not going to get the best possible experience for them or for us. So now we want to understand the actual content ecosystem that exists within our companies. So when the scientists got to Mars and started exploring it, they were researching the rocks and the geography and the topography and the dirt. They were really looking for information about the planet. So too, we need to really ask ourselves these important questions about what content assets we already have within our organizations. So the first thing we need to think about is how many different formats of content do we have? Do we have video? Do we have infographics? Do we have downloadable PDFs? How many articles do we have? What's the page count looking like? How current is this content? We also need to look, this always gets forgotten to the last second, what are our print assets? Do they need to be incorporated onto the web? Do they need to be distributed? Is the content that's locked inside of them, should we pull it out and rewrite it and put it on the web? The architecture, where does the content actually live? Where's it living right now? And then business objectives. Does it solve the problems of the audience, and does it solve the problems of the business? So what is interesting to me about this is that Steph Hay talks about this. When she was a consultant, she's now at Capital One. She leads their content strategy practice. But she used to go in and meet with her clients, and she would say to them, what are the top 3 questions that people come to your website with? And then they would tell her, they knew exactly what they were. And then she would ask them, where are they on your website now? And they were always buried. Because people don't necessarily want to address the major concerns of their audience first. They actually, what they think they want to do is, give them like a group hug feeling. But people are busy. They use mobile because they want to get at an answer very, very quickly. And so it's important to think about all the different types of content we have, and then what types are the most important, and what's going to get us closest to our business objectives. So there's 4 different buckets that we can sort of place our content into when we're doing this auditing and figuring out what the content ecosystem looks like at this point. And so this is from Megan Casey. She wrote a great book, The Content Strategy Toolbox, I think, and it has a lot of really great templates for how to go about doing a lot of different parts of content strategy. And she talks about categorizing in this way. The first way is focus content. So this is the priority content. This is the content that's critical to your customers and also benefits your business. Then there's guide, content that's important to your users and beneficial to your business. So it's probably in that sort of in-between category. And then drive. This content is very important. It's the content that your users don't know that they're looking for, but that you want to move them to. So a perfect example of drive is on Amazon when you purchase something and you put it in your cart and they say, customers who purchase this also purchase these things. And Amazon knows that there's a very valuable way to up their orders. That's design on purpose. Because they know that if they show people other types of content or other types of products that are like the one that you just bought, chances are you might buy that as well. So that's a perfect example of drive content. And then content that you'll include because you feel like you have to. So I remember I was once working with a huge healthcare system out on the West Coast, and they wanted me to look at certain pages that were not getting a lot of visits. So there was this one page about this very sort of sophisticated eye surgery. And it had 8 page views for the entire year. So they wanted to get rid of it completely, but they knew that there was a particular eye surgeon who owned it. And I said to them, you should ask him how many people have come to him through this webpage. So they went to go talk to him, and he said to them, I get all my work through referrals. Like, I don't think people are actually really looking at that page for any information. Okay? So I said to them, but he was very adamant that it needed to stay up on the webpage, of course, on the website. So I said to them, don't fall on your sword for this, right? Like, it's not worth it. It's fine, so it's one page, I mean, along with thousands of others that probably should be gotten rid of that are meh content, but it's one page, it's not gonna kill you, it's not worth it to get into it with somebody just because, there are only 8 page views. So, and that's why I have a rule. You should take the top 20% of the pages that are trafficked and then just dump all the rest of the 80% in garbage. Don't even look at them, because then you don't get into these problems. So here we see the chart that has, that shows you what the most important content is. So obviously, if you look at the arrows, we're looking at the business impacts against the user needs, and obviously your focus content is the most important content that you want to put on the site. And then the drive content is really important also, because you want to say to the audiences, hey, did you think about this also? So now that we know and we've categorized our content, we now need to really prioritize it. But before we do that, we need to structure it in order for it to appear on mobile. So Mark is a botanist, and he grew potatoes in order to live. And he needed to make a lot of water in order to do that. And when he made the water the first time he did it, he almost blew himself up. And the reason I show this slide and tell that part of the story at this point is that this part of the process is probably the most important part, except for understanding your audiences. So let's see if we can explain it in a way that makes sense. So I think of creating content models as thinking about your content as one big piece and then putting it into discrete chunks. And the way that I think about it is sort of like a Lego piece, right? You can put a lot of pieces of Lego together and create one type of structure, but they're each separate Lego pieces. They can stand on their own, and then you can recombine them in another structure. And so too, structured content is very like that. So this is how you create a content model. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm going to go through a couple of examples. So when I first heard about this, I was like, oh, I don't understand this. And then somebody said, well, it's like a recipe. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, I get it now. So what are the different, so a recipe is a whole, like think of a cookbook. It's one whole page in a cookbook, right? But it has discrete sets of content. For example, it has ingredients. Well, you can't really publish a recipe without ingredients. It has directions. Probably hard to publish a recipe without directions. It has cook time. Really nice thing to have, also important, but maybe not the most important thing. Author, who actually created the recipe. Again, would be valuable to know, not the most important thing. However, if your business objective is that your recipe site features, famous celebrity chefs, then author might be a piece of content that you can't do without when you're displaying it on mobile. Here's another example of the way the model looks and breaking the large recipe into different discrete chunks. And this is how it appears now on these different devices, right? So they understand, just looking at this, I know that they know from research, hopefully they know from research, that people really need the picture in order to click on the recipe. So they've divided it out in this way, and it scales according to the device that it's on. So we need to think about taking these discrete chunks of content and then prioritizing what people see on the screen first. So in the desktop layout, what's one? It's your focus content, right? Because it's that core model of satisfying the business objectives of the business and also giving the users answers to the questions that they have. On a mobile layout, it's going to scale like that. But if you don't structure it and break it into discrete chunks and then prioritize what's most important for the business and the user, it's not going to work out well, because the things that they need to see, that they want answers to, or to the questions that they have or that they want to learn more about, aren't going to be available to them right away when they get to the page. And so here's another way of looking at this. The logo is important, the header is important, nav is important, usually in a hamburger at this point, and they want to show all these different things, and this is how they scale on a phone rather than necessarily on a tablet. So I worked with a company called hiphopdx.com, believe it or not, and they went through this process many, many years ago. They had to model their content and figure out how to respond to this responsive design. And so you can see that here is examples of the content modeling that they did. They understood their headlines. They understood that they needed to have a short summary. They had the author. They needed the social stuff, how many people. That's an app called Chartbeat that showed how many people were interacting with the content. And then they have the ads and the related articles. When you see it scale, you understand that the ads and the related articles dropped off the first screen because they had determined that that wasn't necessarily what people wanted to see right away. That was about 6 or 7 years ago. Now, when you look at hiphopdx.com, you'll see that an ad pops up right away. And the reason for that is that their revenue model is driven on ads. That's how the business makes money. So when they first did structured content, they pushed the ads down. And their advertisers came to them and said, this isn't going to work for us because people aren't seeing what we're paying money for them to see. You see here also now the way that they interpreted their design in order to fit ads on to actually to the way the content displays first. So from that perspective, we see that that's a limitation. Your business objectives, if you're on an advertising model or you have something else that you need to show on the screen, you're going to have to think that through in terms of determining what actually really needs to go in to these different priority boxes. So we've talked about understanding your audience and understanding the technology, figuring out what makes the most sense, categorizing your content, auditing it to understand it. So now I want to talk a little bit about design. And what I really want to show is the importance of thinking through the research and the best practices that are out there. So, and this is Mark staring into the sunset, thinking about how he's going to science his way out of this problem. So here are the ergonomics. So this is Luke Wroblewski. He does a lot of work in this area, and he did 1,333 observations of people using mobile devices. And what he found is that this is basically the percentage of the way that it breaks out. Now, I think this research was done about 2 or 3 years ago. I think it's still very valuable. But if you notice the 15% are the 2 thumbs, that comes from BlackBerries. And I think that the more and more we get away from actually having a keyboard on the screen, the less and less you'll actually see this type of behavior from people. So this is really kind of the way that the people that you're interacting with are interacting with your content. And so what that means is that you need to know where are the places that it's going to feel most comfortable for them to touch the different parts of the screen. So here we can see some different, if they're using their left hands, I'm sure Google Analytics will get to a place that eventually they'll be able to tell you if more of your users are lefties or righties. Here's combined when people are using both, and then when people are just using their right hand. So when you're thinking through, okay, I need to know what my content is. I need to understand it from a business objective. I also need to know where it's going to go on the screen in terms of priority. If I need people to interact with that content, or I want them to pursue that call to action, if they're holding it in their right or left hand, I want to make sure that it's easy for them to reach pretty quickly. Here's another example of where somebody who's actually just using one thumb might decide to be able to swoop over the different pieces of content. So if we're looking at this, then we know that there are places that we should put our content so that people will click on it. Here's an example of mobile eye tracking. So this is really interesting to see. We know that on desktop, people read according to an F pattern. Here we see a D pattern, so which is pretty similar to an F pattern, but it tells us something very, very important. What it tells us is that the bottom right and the upper right are not necessarily where they're looking all the time. But when we look at this heat map, we see that they're really focusing in on the center. We rarely see calls to action on a desktop right in the middle of the page. But as we move towards mobile, that's where they've moved. They've moved towards the middle because that's where we know people are focusing and looking. The other important thing to know about this is that we know that the brain and the eye have a harder time reading on a screen than it does actually just reading a piece of paper. That's why the Amazon was so brilliant when they introduced the Kindle, that you could easily read, because it wasn't pulsating light from behind, which makes it harder for the eye and brain to work together. So that's why you get screen fatigue. So from that perspective, that means that we know that if we do have pieces of content that we have to move onto mobile, they also have to be web ready. They also have to be written with chunks and bullets and white space and header tags, because that means that this F pattern and the D pattern are not that far apart. So we need to know that we're creating content that looks like that. And then finally, we want to test. So there's, Steph Hay has this content-first approach. And so what she does is she removes the content from any type of design before she actually goes ahead and starts designing. So what she does is she'll take the content and she'll put it into a Google Doc, or she'll ask her team to do it. And then what happens is they start working with the domain experts or the subject matter experts on the content itself to agree what it should look like and feel like and breathe like before it actually goes into a design. That is the best way to approach a content project. The problem is that most organizations do not approach it that way. They either don't have buy-in from the team to approach it that way, they have so much content they can't even imagine how they would go about doing it. It seems like an unnecessary step. But if we're really going to do, so what I would suggest is take the focus content pieces that you have, the most important ones, divorce them from the design, show them to the people who are going to be making the final decision, and make sure the content is reading and feeling to them the way that they want it to feel, because you'll avoid a lot of stress later. You can test that content free of design and then know that it truly is the content that you want to start with and that you want to embed. Then you can actually then put it into design. So you can put it into a prototype. You don't have to do an entire design, but you can slide it in, and then you can set up mobile testing and see how people are interacting with the content and figure out if what you did divorced of design now is interpreted the same way as when it slid into a design. So here you see an example of two different ways to go about this testing, right? So in one, the text wraps and the buy button is there, which is very easily accessible to the thumb if you're holding it in your right hand, and the buy button is very large at the bottom. So testing those two things are very important, because if you're a transactional website and you're selling stuff, you want people to hit the buy button. The question is, does the bigger buy button get them to buy more? Here's an example. So I think that this is a really great example of thinking about your content but then how it displays. So it's not really about what the person reads or consumes at the end. It's about showing them all the different types of content you have and letting them choose for themselves. So this is a list version versus a picture version. The picture version won the test. However, what I'd also say is that it's always great to give people options. So some people might like to look at it, and you can give them this default, but providing a list way to look at it might also be acceptable for the users or the customers who prefer that kind of display. Here's another example. So this is a dentist's office, and they had to decide what worked the most for getting people to pay their invoice. So I would be shocked if the one on the left is the one that won, right? It's clearly the one on the right. That's a lot of money for a dentist. It makes it very clear what the amount is, how you can pay it, and then the action is, again, in the middle, where it belongs, and shows how to finish the transaction. On the left, you see a lot of information there, right? That probably the person does not need, and does not need to see when they're paying their invoice. So we walk through the importance of understanding your personas, understanding the technology, making sure that you understand the content ecosystem and that you audit that content to make sure that you understand how it's speaking to your audiences and if it's getting you closer to what you're trying to achieve. You create content models and prioritize your content, then you design, and then you go ahead and you test. And he made it. He actually got off the planet, believe it or not. It was a feel-good story at the end, even though it was probably quite impossible. So thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here. It's great to be back in Sioux Falls.